Siman.
Kalau enggak mungkin di jalan ya baru boleh.
nasi gosok Pak.
Nah,
Iya, kita menjadi Pak. Press yes button. Tadi kalau belum pas main.
Nah,
Kalau di tapi makin prakteknya apa? Sudah ada, Bu. Saya mau ya. Mandi coba. Hari tuh, aku bisa dibawa. Ada acara pesta di rumah. Dia acara pimpinan lo. Lalu ada lain cinta itu. Siap punan, kita bagian wajib. Aduh, tadi. Itu cewek bicara Indonesia. Gampang dong. Itulah, udah belajar memang yang mau dilakukan. Bandung apa waktu dan menjadi lebih malu. Baru udah terima. Kadang salah kurang apa? Apa perkara di waktu masih dalam fisika? Assalamualaikum. Itu anak-anak bapak ibu. Ada yang sabar. Iya, berapa sabar ada yang saya lupa. Ambo kepikiran praktik. Kita lihat berapa dia orang dia itu belum pasti apa. Langsung mau nyoba begini. Aku apa sih? Ulang ini aku mau berangkat. Ini belum boleh. Baik dan apa dan itu. Berangkat. Yuk, aku mau keluar itu. Kalau semua orang ini, aku bilang tapi ini ada dua apa dia besok. Ada juga ada kenapa? Kalau mau pasti juga nggak sampai deh. Betul, itu mau emang keren rumah dia. Tenang apa? Video film kita. Udah banyak tentang air. Bisa aku yakin nggak bisa ditulis dokter. Ternyata aku suka tadi itu jadi rapi kan, terus kita bilang melakukan terus mulai. Ada kado uang kurang tahu. Yang mau ya. Program buat itu. Posisi kedua saya. banyak istilah tapi katanya aku di ketemu orang aku saya maksudnya siapa yang untuk benar aku tuh untuk mana kalau dari Jakarta itu lama bisa waktu kan tinggal mencari-cari posisi di mana digeser ke situ bisa bi sama saya awal kalau lepas masuk rangka kali aja posisi di kamera sedikit apa yang di kamera pakai jurus ninja aja. Kalian lihat ada mobil ini? Hah? Kalian lihat terima? Ada awak senior kan udah di siapa? Bisa mancanegara maksudnya. Iya. Bisa ada orang bisa juga. Nyawaannya. Kalau ada makan semua. Kamu kayak nelpon, nggak langsung ke rumah HP. Koneksi panca lah ya. Ya, itu itu bawa kan yang itu yang bawa kalau sampai pakai alat itu langsung kayak gitu. ada intervensi yang mau jaringan yang lain.
Kalau saya kendalanya kalau saya naik ke
Jaringan apa?
itu di sektor itu besar karena pertama tapi tidak pengalaman punya organ kita
Iya, cuma itu saya itu lagi. Kalau apa?
Salahnya kalau kayak di pusat itu jadi kadang-kadang tuh kami saya ada kayak spek masih ada yang ada itu nanti kan kan yang jadi kebutuhan
Pasti yang keadilan
kalau tidak dan pertama bisa tinggal ya
SPSS. SPBS, KSS. Iya, ini kan nanti bisa tampilkan dari evolusi. Ada di kan? Ditanya sama dia. Siapa? Udah mulai nih. Udah mulai. Mana yang kalau kita mana? Nggak ada ya.
kamera. Masih pertanyaan kerja. Tipis ya. Bisa ya. Batas tempat ya. Ada jadi kan yang 18 ya. Bisa sampai sore besok jam 3 kan? Kedua. Oh, itu bisa ya. Maksudnya gini, ada sesuatu barang saya kedua ya. Jadi Pak ya, beliau baru berangkat sore. Tadi yang mau 051 kita pada ini saja ya. Kalau mainan sendiri tiga panggilan dua telepon satu ini sama ya. Pengalaman yang kemarin bisa untuk penulisan dan tulisan ya. Ekspaktor. Itu bagaimana? Isi suara ya. Bukan. Kalau isi suara sebagai negara
Apa ya dari tiga kalau kita ada mana yang
Saya kan di rumah sakit ya. Bukan di Indonesia. Saya mau di kan ada bisa kita bahas semua tapi
Bisa.
dengan konsep itu tapi
Kalau itunya bisa digadang. So the first component is the fact that I would basically provide a little bit of a background. Universal health coverage in Thailand, so you understand it a little bit better. And then I would discuss the healthcare institutions and the historical development of healthcare institutions in Thailand over the past 40, 50 years. And then I would discuss the political opportunities in Thailand as well. That conclude as to how we achieved universal health coverage through my thesis, which was the fact that we had a combination of opportunity and preparation. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about the landscape first. Yes, so I'll provide you with a little bit of an understanding as to what the Thai universal health coverage looks like. Okay. Next slide. Yeah. All right. So if you look at the chart, this is basically the historical path of universal health coverage in Thailand. We sort of mapped this against GNI, the gross national income. The very first public health insurance that we got was basically in 1975, and that was for the poor. Yeah, in order for you to basically be eligible for that medical welfare scheme, you had to be identified as poor. Right, so the government would basically just send around people and provided instruction for hospital staff to identify the poor, in which case you get the treatment for free. This is completely tax-based. Right. The second coverage that we got was basically in 1978, and that was the Civil Servant Medical Benefit Scheme. This covers the families' children.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat datang dan selamat bergabung kembali peserta Forum Nasional Kebijakan Kesehatan Indonesia. Saat ini kita menyaksikan diskusi tentang tentang institutional setting and policy change that enable Thailand achieving universal health coverage. Untuk itu, kepada peserta diharapkan bisa memperhatikan dan berkontribusi mungkin dalam diskusi. Selamat menyaksikan.
Coverage was basically only 71%, just down below. In 2003, we scaled up to 95. Right now, we have 100%. Okay? On the official statistics, it's basically, they say it's 99.9, but that was basically because there were some people in transition. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so altogether, let me do a quick recap here. Right now, we achieved universal coverage in 2002. Right? Thanks. All right. And the universal health coverage in Thailand was composed of 3 different funds. We had multiple payer system. We have a system for social security, we have a system for a civil servant medical benefit scheme, and then we have what was known as the universal health coverage scheme, or the 30 baht scheme in Thailand. The 30 baht referred to the co-payment. Right. Then you should ask 2 questions. First of all, were we ready in 2002? So that would be a pretty good question to ask. And the second question would be whether or not what happened in 2001 that made UHC possible in the first place. Next slide. All right, so let's talk about the healthcare institutions. I'm going to say that we've done a lot of preparation towards universal health coverage. Right. And the preparation, you can actually look at it from the production function perspective. I would say that in order for you to basically be able to produce any healthcare at all, you would need to have 3 components of that. Yeah? So you would need some sort of materials, including medical equipment, drugs, cheap enough for you to provide access, healthcare access to the entire population. You would also need to have labor. You need to have enough doctors, enough nurses, enough medical personnel. And then you would also need to have capital, meaning not including just the money, not just the money, but also the hospitals. So there would need to be some sort of physical access to the healthcare system as well. And then all of these things combined, once you actually plug it into the production function, you get healthcare services. Right, next slide. Yeah. All right, so that's basically what I elaborated on. Next one, please. Okay, next one, sorry. Okay, there you go. So let's see what the process looks like. All right, in the grander scheme of things, we basically had in 1937, that was 65 years before universal health coverage. We achieved universal health coverage in 2002. Yeah. So 65 years before that, what we had was the government pharmaceutical organization. Right, so that was the organization that would be later producing a lot of generic drugs for universal health coverage in Thailand. In 1942, 60 years before universal health coverage, we had the Ministry of Public Health. Then 52 years before that, we had supply side expansion, complete supply side expansion, meaning that by the end of 1950, we had one major hospital in each and every single province in Thailand. And we had 73 provinces, and we have 77 now. So there's a major hospital in every single province. Right. In the 1960s, what we did was we did the National Health Plan. Yeah, so that's basically providing guidelines for investment in Thailand and how we would actually be using government budget in order to make sure that we have enough supply for the demand of healthcare. Right. In 1961, the Ministry of Public Health decided to produce their own nurses, so we have more nurses from the 1960 onwards. In the 1971, realizing that the distribution of doctors was a problem in Thailand, so you know that most of the time doctors will be concentrated in major cities, right? So what the Thai government did was to pass a law that says that once you're a medical student, when upon graduation, you have to go out to the remote area and work for 3 years before you can come back. Otherwise, you have to pay a fine. Right? So that's how we make sure that the rural-urban divide is getting minimized. Next one, please. Right. And in the 1975, what we did was we engaged the local people. We know that a lot of local people, they actually have some understanding of the medical benefits. So what we did was we trained them. So we got village health volunteers, and then we also make sure that we provided incentive for doctors to stay in rural areas as well. So if you are a doctor and you work full-time in the rural area, after the 3 years of compulsory service, you get top up. You get additional money. That's called the hardship allowance. Hardship meaning that you're away from all the pubs and the clubs and all the fancy restaurants. Yes, because you have to work in the remote area, we pay you a little bit more. Altogether, doctors in rural areas actually earn more if they work in the public sector only. Yeah? In 1994, so we basically produced a project that allowed us to basically bring in students from remote areas to come receive medical education. And what we then did was to basically provide them with scholarships and ask them in return for the fact that they would go back home and work. Because we know that if you have medical students from Bangkok and if you ask them to actually go outside and work permanently in rural areas, they're going to say no. Because that's not their homes, yeah? So that's probably the same thing here. So we basically just get students, good students, from outside of Bangkok and then come and receive the medical education in Bangkok. Right? And then later in 1986 to 1996, we had a decade of health center development. So we had major hospitals in each and every single province. And now, right now, in the sub-district, the smallest, about 5,000 people catchment area, we built up primary healthcare center in each and every single sub-district. And by then, because we had already also experiences with prepayment scheme, health insurance schemes, and we also established from the 1990s onwards, we also established research centers in order for us to make sure that the production process went smoothly from then on, and we also make sure that we would be able to provide health at low cost. Next. And that's basically the trend. You can see that hospitals is completely going up, doctor and nurses also go up as well. Next one, please. All right, just to do a quick recap. All right, so I just want to show you that this is basically how I envisioned how Thailand was able to achieve universal health coverage in 2002. It was a historical development. We had the materials, which was cheap drugs. We had personnel. We've been producing lots of doctors and nurses, not enough, but at least there were enough during the time, and we're still producing more, of course. And then we had the capital, because we had a hospital in each and every single province and each and every single sub-district as well. So altogether, institutionally speaking, in terms of the health, we were somewhat ready, I would argue. The question then became, next one, whether or not the politicians cared enough. We were ready in 2002, but without the opportunities without the political opportunities, we wouldn't actually be able to achieve universal health coverage anyway. Right. So in order for me to talk about the political institutions a little bit, allow me to refer to the political process here. Right. Every single time when you're trying to push out a reform, you have to start off with that box right there, and that's basically signaling. You have to be able to voice to whoever has the power that there's a problem with the existing system right now, right? And your voice has to be heard. If it's not heard, it's gone with the wind. There's no way you're actually going to be able to get any feedback. Once it's heard, then what's the next thing that you have to do is then to formulate some sort of policy in order to solve the existing problems. And then when you do that, you have to then go on and aggregate. How do you aggregate? You basically just try to get the political support for the policy you're proposing. Next one, please. All right. So here's what happened. Before 2002, what happened was there were a lot of problems with access. Even before 2002, before we achieved universal health coverage, about 18 million people were without insurance. Yeah, so there was a lack of insurance coverage then. There was also still the urban-rural divide. Even though we passed a law that would make doctors stay outside of Bangkok for 3 years, there was still a huge concentration. Because all these freshly graduated medical doctors, what they would do is they would be willing to pay the fine. Because they know that if they have private practice, they'll be able to recover the cost anyway. Yeah, so there's still the urban-rural divide. There's also complete underutilization of health services. The IP inpatient rate of utilization was only 0.4 in 1996, and that was partly attributable to the lack of financial protection in Thailand. And there's also an abuse of the system. This is known as the low-income card scheme. If you still remember, that was basically the first health insurance scheme in Thailand, where we basically provided free care for the poor. What happened then was that in order for you to receive free care, you had to be identified as poor people. How would you be identified? You would have to be identified by hospital staff, and that was completely degrading to actually go to the hospital and tell people that you're poor. Right? I don't know, there's a face-saving culture in the country that made it very difficult. And in fact, a lot of rich people with political connections, they decided to pretend to be poor. So you would have a situation with the poor pretending to be not poor and the rich pretending to be poor in order for them to receive the benefits. So that was complete abuse of the system. In fact, about 72% of the poor in the country at the time did not actually receive free care at all. We conducted a study about 5 years after the implementation. All right, next slide. So, and in Thailand then, just to provide you with a little bit of a brief background of the environment. So you can see that in Thailand, there was already some sort of momentum. We knew there were problems with the health system. but no one in powers anyway, they didn't really care too much. So we actually had to build up the political movement. The political movement was built up in 1993 when we had a discussion with the World Bank about universal health coverage in the first place. And then we actually had momentum for reform. We had the sequence of military governments. In 1992, there was an uprising against the military government that made people really sick of the politicians. Yeah? And in 1997, there was also an economic crisis, and that means that there has to be some sort of a reform in terms of the economy as well. All right? And so in October 1997, what happened was we had to pass the constitution, a new constitution, and that new constitution would allow the public to be engaged in the policy-making process, providing them with opportunities to best be engaged in public policy-making. And you could see that clause 52 of the institution says that we would need universal health coverage. So the people spoke through the constitution. Next slide, please. All right, and here's what happened. There's a lot of political maneuvering. This person here, who looks like the doctor the most, this is Dr. Sungwon Nitiyarampong, the person on the right of the slide. So he basically approached two political leaders. Right? The first one was basically Dr. Mr. Chua Lee Pai, who was the prime minister in 1998 to 2001. He was basically the one who steered Thailand out of economic depression. So what happened was when Dr. Sungwon basically approached the then prime minister about universal health coverage, realizing that Thailand was just coming out of economic depression, of course Chua Lee Pai would say no. Because universal health coverage required a lot of money. And he was basically very big at cutting government budgets. Yeah? So the next person that he went to would then be Thaksin Shinawatra, who was a leader of the Thai Rak Thai party, who was coming in contention in the electoral race, and then he said yes. Of course, why? Because he was a tycoon, absolutely no political background in 2001, and what he did was he actually wanted to have a manifesto, an electoral manifesto that would allow him to win the election. And universal health coverage is very sexy. All right, next slide. All right, so there we go. From the 1999 all the way to 2000, guess who won? Thaksin Shinawatra won. And there we got the universal health coverage because we had the policy in the first place. The universal health coverage then was called the 30 baht scheme. Yeah, 30 baht referring to the co-payment that you had to pay for each episode of illness. So that's an equivalent of $1, $1 US. So every single time you go to the hospital, you pay $1, and then you get all the treatment, regardless of whether it was outpatient or inpatient. Yeah? Next one. And the implementation was taken into 4 different stages. We piloted with 6 provinces first, and then 15, and then altogether we rolled down. Right, next one. Together, we had about the entire process from start to finish, from non-universal coverage to universal coverage, took about 2 years. Yeah? And we had the legislation to back up, to legitimize universal health coverage as well. Next one, please. All right. And here's what I actually wanted to highlight. Of course, there would be some opposition towards universal health coverage in Thailand, and if you look at the middle. Yeah? So the opposition here is basically just, of course, the Democrat Party, and that was basically the previous prime minister. And they would say that universal health coverage was completely fiscally irresponsible. But because the Thai Rak Thai Party won a majority, a landslide victory in the election, they couldn't say anything because, I mean, even though they thought it was fiscally irresponsible, they wouldn't be able to actually implement sort of any grand opposition. Next one, please. So overall, I would say that, next one, all right. So overall, I would say that universal health coverage, in addition to the preparation that we had, we also had opportunities, political opportunities as well. The 1997 crisis provided a lot of momentum. people were very poor then because the GDP just went down completely, very abruptly. They wanted some sort of safety net. Universal health coverage provided it. Alright, so I would argue it's basically a combination of preparation and opportunities. Just to quickly conclude, next one, sorry. Just to quickly conclude, I would say that it's basically a combination of two sets of institutions. You have to be able to prepare the healthcare institutions correctly, and then you would actually, meaning that you have to be ready for the provision of coverage you're proposing, and there has to be some sort of luck involved in the process as well. So I end my talk here. Welcome some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. It's right on time. Thank you very much. So we're going to have a short Q&A session. I would welcome anyone, if anyone here would have a question for Noko. Not yet? Okay, I will turn to our co-host because we are holding the conference through relay.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
So there are other participants in other cities. Dari para co-host, mungkin ada yang ingin bertanya? Bahasa Indonesia boleh bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia saja, tidak apa. Nanti akan kami usahakan untuk terjemahkan. Ada yang ingin bertanya?
Kalau kita kontak mereka. Padahal ada yang mau bertanya, mau?
Ada satu?
Enggak.
Sama aja masalah.
Baik, ada pertanyaan dari peserta dari Universitas Trisakti. Kami persilakan.
Informasi detailnya.
Ada satu sakti menanya.
Pertanyaan sebesar apa masalah apa?
Okay.
Masalah kita. Lomba besar besaran.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for I want to ask some questions. Implementation of the program in Thailand, but the feedback, the deductible that you impose on the population, the 30 baht program, how important is the deductible for it? And because in Indonesia we have a program that we don't have a really deductible at all, which we only have that you can go and come to the hospital with only your BPJS card, and you can get all the medical expense you want. So how much important do you think that there has to be a deductible in your program? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that question. That's a very interesting question. Just based on the information within the slides that I put up, I wouldn't actually be able to answer the question based on that information. So I have to refer to a different study. Because we achieved universal health coverage in 2002. And then we basically just, between 2002 to 2006, we charged 30 baht. It was only $1, per one episode of illness. In 2006, however, we dropped the 30 baht. So right now, people pay absolutely nothing, which is the same situation as what you're describing. And you could see that the 30 baht co-payment really just didn't really cover much of the cost, because the cost for one episode was a lot higher. There was a study in 2001 that suggested that the right co-payment would be 100. So we went down from 100 baht to 30, so that we knew that the 30 baht wasn't going to be enough to cover the cost. So it wasn't cost recovery purposes. What 30 baht did, however, in order for us to actually look at that, you could see that the utilization after the 30 baht co-payment was dropped increased about twice as high. So the 30 baht wasn't there for the cost recovery reason. It was there to prevent some moral hazard, making sure that people just didn't actually just go to the hospital and get care that would be unnecessary. So I would argue, just based on the historical development, that the 30 baht wasn't important in terms of the cost recovery, but it was important in terms of stopping people from using unnecessary care. It wasn't adequate though.
Yes. Masih ada pertanyaan tambahan?
So I want to ask about my next question will be, of course, what's your opinion in like the level of the utilization of the program? Is it a good thing or is it necessarily a bad thing? So if it's like, is it better with the 30 or is it not better for the program and for the?
Yes. Alright, so the current situation in Thailand right now is, I think we're facing the same thing here, is financial sustainability is at risk. I'm a health economist by training, and I believe the moral hazard exists. I believe that people basically sometimes go to the hospital without actually having to go to the hospital. They go get unnecessary care. And we see that in among different subgroups of the population. We find that especially in rural areas with the older people in general, because the opportunity cost of time are very low. They don't work, right? So they don't need to take time out of work in order to go to the hospital. And you can see the hospital completely overcrowded. So I would argue, and this is my personal opinion really, that I think there has to be some sort of co-payment. We need to make sure that people understand that universal health coverage isn't given to them or isn't handed over to them for free. There has to be a cause involved. They need to take better care of their own health as well, right? But that's not to say that I think we need to strike the right balance between, in terms of how much the co-payment should be. We conducted, as I said earlier, in 1999, the co-payment, the desired co-payment was basically 100. I and Dr. Serpen, a colleague of mine, we conducted another study, and we basically looked at the cost. And in order for us to be able to sustain the cost, I think the co-payment would have to be about 250, which is how many dollars would that be? About $8 to $9 per one episode. Right, so I would argue for the co-payment.
Okay, thank you. Jadi kalau boleh saya jelaskan sedikit untuk yang mungkin mengalami kesulitan. Jadi pada tahun 2002 sampai 2006 memang diberlakukan kebijakan tertibat, di mana orang akan datang ke rumah sakit atau ke puskesmas dan bayar tertibat. 34 itu kira-kira $1 untuk menerima pelayanan. Tapi ini bukan angka yang hasil hitungan, karena kalau angka dari hasil hitungan, tadi beliau katakan yang disarankan 100 baht sebetulnya. Tapi bahkan setelah beliau melakukan penelitian lebih lanjut, seharusnya angkanya malah 260 baht. Jadi jauh di atas itu. Tapi hanya ditetapkan 30 baht, itu hanya untuk kepentingan mengurangi moral hazard, mengurangi kecenderungan orang untuk pergi ke rumah sakit atau pergi ke puskesmas untuk mendapatkan pelayanan yang murah, begitu, padahal mungkin mereka tidak terlalu memerlukan, hanya untuk mengurangi itu. Tapi tahun 2006 sudah dihentikan, dan sekarang sudah tidak ada lagi co-payment dari masyarakat untuk menikmati pelayanan kesehatan. Tetapi beliau tadi menyatakan bahwa karena beliau seorang health economist, beliau juga merasa bahwa financial sustainability dari cakupan kesehatan semesta itu bisa terancam karena memang orang punya tendensi untuk melakukan moral hazard. Sehingga yang paling baik untuk mengurangi ini adalah tetap menetapkan co-payment, walaupun co-paymentnya tidak sebesar yang didasarkan pada itu yang kira-kira sarankan beliau. Ada pertanyaan selanjutnya, silakan.
Terima kasih. Bu Cita itu menggunakan istilah kenikmatan tadi. Iya, tidak ada orang sakit nikmat, Bu. Baik, ada dua hal, tolong diterjemahkan, Bu. Pertama, di Thailand, saya pernah dengar mereka juga menggunakan satu kelas pada waktu inpatient standar, walaupun di rumah sakit tetap ada pilihan beberapa kelas barangkali. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, mohon mendapatkan pengalaman dari Thailand. Bagaimana proses mereka menentukan kelas standar itu tadi? Tentu ada gejolaknya atau apa pengalaman waktu di Thailand dilakukan. Terima kasih atas kesempatan dan tolong terjemahkan.
Baik, terima kasih.
Thank you for that question. So this is in reference to the inpatient classification, if I may. In Thailand, what we do is there are two things here. The law, based on National Health Security Act, basically requires that everyone who's an inpatient would need to be treated equally, right, regardless of your socioeconomic status. The law definitely, very clearly talks about equity and equality of treatment as well. So people actually understand that when they go to the hospital. However, in practice, in terms of implementation, some hospitals, they basically provide different classification of inpatient wards. What they do is they would have what they call the paying ward, meaning that the treatment is free, but the room is a little bit more expensive. And there's also the non-paying ward, where you basically just can go and you don't have to pay anything. People with the ability to pay, sometimes they would go to the paying ward because they get better non-clinical quality in terms of room and board. People are fine with it actually because they understand that universal health coverage is all in all. It's a universal health coverage. You have to understand in Thailand because it's tax based. They know it's a welfare scheme. It's not an insurance scheme per se. People don't pay premium, right? Because it's a welfare scheme. They understand that there has to be. In order for the hospitals to survive, there has to be some sort of a classification. And this is probably the same as in Indonesia as well. A lot of the hospitals, and something going on within the hospital, usually it is communicated in the local community. So I think the problems get subsided that way.
Apakah cukup menjawab? Jadi beliau mengatakan bahwa untuk rawat inap, karena menurut undang-undangnya semua harus dilayan sama, maka secara undang-undang mereka harus pergi ke rawat inap yang sama kelasnya, gitu. Jadi tidak kelas seperti kelas 3, 2, 1 gitu. Mereka harus di kelas 3 begitu. Tetapi kalau mereka ingin membayar lebih, boleh. Jadi mereka hanya membayar kamarnya saja, naik kelas ke kamar di atasnya, tapi hanya membayar kamarnya saja. Pelayanannya tetap sama. Mereka hanya ingin mencari kualitas yang lebih baik, tapi yang sifatnya kualitas non-klinikal, tidak ada hubungannya dengan pelayanan klinisnya, tetap sama. Dan rupanya tidak terlalu ada gejolak atau perlawanan dari masyarakat, tidak terlalu banyak protes. Karena masyarakat memahami bahwa sistem ini sistem yang dibangun berdasarkan welfare. Jadi bukan sifatnya tidak seperti asuransi, karena mereka tidak membayar sama sekali, tidak ada premi, tidak ada apa. Sifatnya welfare berdasarkan pajak, sehingga mereka tidak menuntut yang seperti kita bayangkan. Jadi tidak ada penolakan yang terlalu besar. Masih ada pertanyaan lagi? Maaf, ada pertanyaan dari co-host. There's another question here. Pertanyaannya dari Fakultas Kedokteran di Universitas Sumatera Utara. Mereka menanyakan. Oh, tidak jadi, Pak. Oke, baik. Oh jadi. Saya pikir tidak jadi. Maksudnya Silakan Pak. Iya.
Terima kasih Mbak Cita. Kami sangat tertarik sekali dengan satu kata. Thailand yakin menuju universal coverage. Kemudian tadi ada satu slide menggambarkan bagaimana kemesraan antara dokter, kemudian pemerintah, dan politikus. Tentu ini adalah merupakan tiga kekuatan yang bisa meyakinkan Thailand itu menuju universal coverage. Keyakinan itu adalah satu modal. Namun kita tidak belum yakin sampai sekarang, sampai itu tadi bahwasanya 2019 dengan berbagai permasalahan. Makanya kami ingin bagaimana suatu strategi Thailand itu bisa ketiga kekuatan ini tadi memiliki komitmen dan baik itu dalam ucapan dan juga dalam implementasi dalam menuju universal coverage. Tentu pengalaman dan strategi ini adalah sangat penting sekali. Modal mungkin misalnya untuk Medan nanti bagaimana apa yang harus kami lakukan dari tiga kekuatan ini untuk Medan bisa yakin juga minimal itu bisa yakin juga kami bisa mencapai universal itu tadi apa yang harus kami lakukan. Terima kasih, mungkin hanya sekedar pengalaman walaupun tadi sudah diceritakan.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Zulfendri. Mungkin pertanyaannya untuk yang di ruangan sini Pak, seperti apa ya? Jadi, sorry.
Kalau fitur boleh, misalnya nih, menetapkan 10 juta kelas 1, 5
Harusnya
juta,
dia di posisi
rumah sakit yang menentukan.
Oh, yeah. So I think there's in order for us to build political support through many different the first one, and this is something you understand, is that the Ministry of Public Health has established independent readings. I'm sure that a lot of you have probably sort of seen or heard a couple of them before. We have sort of an international health policy program. We have an organization called HITAP, which looks at the health technology. We have HISRO, which looks at the insurance system. So these research institutes, they understand that research lies not with just the research process, but also with research translation. Research have research ideas in order to communicate with the politicians and show them that, like that they're having is important and actually showing to improve the system. And so that's they have to go back. And then the next thing is it's a lot of political maneuvering. I think it cannot be generalized, to say the least. Back then, Thaksin, he was to become the prime minister. He was open to suggestions. He realized that the technocrats were quite in terms of the political process, and we had that momentum going on. And that we got universal health coverage because opportunities.
Ya, jadi dia menyatakan bahwa untuk mencapai hubungan yang lebih baik antara ada organisasi profesi, kemudian para pengambil kebijakan, ada partai politik, pemerintah dan sebagainya, bisa ditemukan berbagai cara. Salah satunya adalah tadi beliau menekankan pentingnya research institution atau lembaga-lembaga penelitian. Kalau di Taiwan kebetulan lembaga penelitiannya didirikan oleh pemerintah, tetapi mereka merupakan lembaga. Jadi perlunya penelitian ini menghasilkan bukan hanya penelitian, tetapi kemampuan untuk menerjemahkan penelitian tersebut sehingga bisa dikomunikasikan dengan baik kepada para politikus, para pemimpin kita, supaya mereka bisa mendapatkan dukungan data dan informasi yang mereka butuhkan untuk bisa mengambil kebijakan yang tepat. Kemudian yang kedua adalah tentu saja beliau katakan lagi untuk beruntungnya gitu, karena ada momentum politik yang bisa dimanfaatkan. Dan ini mungkin juga cocok dengan di Indonesia, karena momentum politik kita untuk mencapai cakupan kesehatan semesta juga hampir sama seperti kita. Jadi ada krisis ekonomi, pergantian pemerintahan, dan seterusnya. Jadi kita tinggal melengkapi saja berbagai channel yang bisa kita gunakan untuk mendapatkan dukungan politik untuk mencapai JKN yang lebih baik. So I'm sorry, but the time is up for us to discuss. I'm sorry, very appreciated your presentation and your insight. But we're going to have a little time here to listen to another presentation. Okay, there is another. Ada pembicara utama lain yang juga sudah kami hadirkan untuk Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, yaitu Cheryl Cashin. Sayangnya beliau tidak bisa hadir secara langsung di Indonesia. Beliau adalah seorang senior fellow di Research for Development Institute di Washington DC, dan beliau mohon maaf tidak bisa hadir di Indonesia, tetapi kami merekam sesi webinar dengan beliau, dan beliau sudah menyiapkan presentasi untuk kita sehingga Bapak dan Ibu bisa menikmati juga apa yang ingin beliau sampaikan. Kami persilakan.
So good afternoon, everyone. I hope that by this time you're enjoying a very lively and informative National Health Policy Forum in Indonesia. Indeed, the country's journey for UHC has really picked up pace since 2014, and the global health community is watching, and we're all offering our full support. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak today on the topic of implementing JKN and taking stock about whether, in fact, it is improving equity and helping to achieve universal health coverage, and then to look at what some policy options are to continue to direct the resources in the system in the most effective way to continue to improve effective coverage and of course, equity. Next slide, please. So what do we know about whether JKN is in fact improving equity? Often we don't have complete data and information to answer such questions, and we can just look across the valid information that we do have and try to put together the picture to take stock of where we are and see if any course correction is needed. So the next slide, I think we'd like to look at maybe three big signs about whether JKN is in fact improving equity and whether effective coverage is improving. So let's first look at enrollment, and I think this is a very impressive picture that since 2014 to increase enrollment from 52% of the population to 70% today is a very impressive achievement toward population coverage. So that's something that's very impressive, and in fact, the largest share of the covered population is that is fully subsidized by PPI, so really reaching the Oregon Air Force. So I think this is a very impressive picture. We don't know if the poor are disproportionately benefiting from this coverage, and I think there are some questions and more information needed about the targeting of PPI, but in general, this picture is quite promising in terms of expanded enrollment in the few short years since JKN is. So of course, population coverage is not enough. It's important, it's a first step, but it's not enough to ensure effective coverage. So then we look at information available on access and utilization. And I think these next two slides are also quite promising, that there is some evidence that the increase in access to services and utilization is in fact poor. And is becoming more so, which I think is a very promising sign. And on the next slide, you see it's not just for primary health care, which is often pro-poor, and why we very much always work to emphasize and increase and strengthen primary health care. With JKN, we're also seeing that the access and utilization for inpatient care is also becoming more pro-poor. So I think that is also quite a promising sign. Then finally, if we look at the next slide, looking at the expenditure. And we know that the more that a health system relies on out-of-pocket payments as a share in total health expenditure, the more inequitable it is. Out-of-pocket payments are almost always inequitable and disproportionately creating burden for the poor. So the fact that the increase in government health spending that has taken place since JKN was implemented in 2014, we also are seeing a decline of out-of-pocket payments. We don't know for sure that decline is disproportionately benefiting the poor, but what we know from international experience that typically, since the burden of out-of-pocket payments falls more on the poor, that a decline in those payments, we hope, is also improving equity. So next slide, please. I just want to summarize and say that there are some promising trends, and there is some indication that JKN is indeed improving effective health coverage, it's improving access to necessary services, and improving financial protection. The impact on equity is difficult to assess from the available analysis that I have had access to, but the fact that there is increasing population coverage, it's reaching the poor and non-poor with subsidies. There's an indication increased utilization that appears to be, at least partially for poor, that these are good signs. But the challenge means to really deeply understanding what's happening with utilization, with quality of services, what's happening on the supply side. There's still a lot that we don't know. On the next slide, please. Although there has been a lot of investment in the supply side since JKN has been implemented, inequity remains, and there is a lot of variability on the supply side. And this slide shows you on the primary healthcare, in the primary healthcare sector, continued variability in the supply side and probably inequity then in the services that the poor are receiving. Under BPJS, the purchasing agency for JKN, primary healthcare providers are paid per capita a fixed amount every month for each registered JKN participant. And the target is to have each primary care doctor serving 5,000 participants. But you can see from this slide that it varies quite a bit. And in some provinces, that ratio exceeds 8,500. So that's a very, very large population being served by one doctor. On the other hand, in a number of provinces, that number goes below 4,000. So this implies inequality in access to primary care services to a physician. But it also shows that in the rural and remote areas with very low populations, that the primary care sector, the doctors and facilities are disadvantaged financially, that they're receiving less in capitation revenue. So this is something that points to a potential source of inequity and lack of access in the primary care sector under JKN. So I think the next slide, I just wanted to summarize some of the questions that I still have, some information that's still needed where additional research is needed to more deeply understand the impact of JKN on equity. So my questions are households in the poorest quintiles more likely to access necessary care in a timely manner than they were before JKN? Are the improvements and investments in infrastructure and quality reaching the poorest and those living in the most remote areas? And are quality gaps closing? I don't think we have been able to necessarily answer all of those questions with available research. And in terms of equity in financial protection, has the reduction in out-of-pocket payments led to a disproportionate reduction in financial burden and catastrophic spending for the poor. So those questions still require a bit more analysis to answer. So on the next slide, I'd like to turn now to policy action that I think is needed to continue to improve coverage, to continue to direct the resources in the system towards improving access, quality, and equity, and sustainability of JCOT, which I think is a growing concern as utilization has increased and costs have increased faster than revenues in the system. The government has made a strong financial commitment to subsidizing coverage and improving equity. And we see that this has brought gains. But some are arguing that more resources are needed. And I think that is an open question, but what is certainly clear is that more can be done to use the resources in the system better and to strategically purchase the medicines and services that are covered. I want to speak about some of the policy levers within strategic purchasing that could be used better to direct resources and potentially any new potential funding towards priority populations and cost-effective services. The next slide, please. But what do we mean by strategic purchasing, and why is this important for equity and effective coverage under JCOT? Strategic purchasing allows the agency that's responsible for paying health providers and medicine suppliers on behalf of the covered population, of course in this case BPJSK, to use levers that are available to make strategic decisions about what to buy, from whom to buy, and how to buy. And I'd like to give a bit more detail of what those levers are. And then we can talk about to what extent BPJS is able to use those levers to improve equity, efficiency, and sustainability in JCOT. The levers under deciding what to buy, of course, this is fundamentally focused on the benefits package, which we know is quite comprehensive in JCOT, but there are more levers under this set of decisions. So looking more carefully at what medicines to buy, what the service delivery standards are for the services that are in the benefits package, being more strategic about defining what is actually being purchased. What is being purchased in terms of primary health care versus secondary and tertiary services as access is actually happening in reality. Then there's a set of decisions around deciding from which providers and medicine suppliers to buy, from whom to buy. And there's a lot of room here to be more selective, to contract with providers and create the conditions under those contracts that are much more strategic. Being able to contract with providers in the private sector to close access gaps, particularly in rural and remote areas, and being very strategic and deliberate about that. And then finally, what we often think of when we think of strategic purchasing, and that's deciding how to buy. So like setting the terms of the contracts, the reporting requirements, and other terms of the contracts. Selecting provider payment methods very strategically to meet specific objectives. Setting payment rates, and monitoring provider performance. So this is a whole area that I think, of course, BPJS and the Ministry of Health has made a lot of progress, but there is room to be even more strategic to make better use of the resources in the system. On the next slide, how can strategic purchasing specifically improve equity? And I just want to point out that in most systems, equity doesn't improve on its own. That this is something that requires very deliberate policy response. This is deliberate in terms of how subsidies are targeted, but there are also some very deliberate decisions within strategic purchasing that are needed to ensure equity is always improving. And just a few examples of what some of those strategic decisions are that can help to improve equity. Contracting with both public and providers strategically to close access gaps in rural and remote areas, creating incentives to shift resources and utilization to primary health care, which we know tends to be more pro-core than secondary and tertiary services. And then creating very specific provider incentives to increase coverage of priority services and interventions, and specifically for the poor and vulnerable households. I want to just take a look now at some of the foundations that are needed to do this, and that's on the next slide. And then looking at some systems across the world that have done this successfully. So strategic purchasing requires the institutional structure being very clear about who does what, who carries out which of these strategic purchasing functions. Some good operational systems for how it's done, and then constantly building capacity to do this while managing external factors, the policies that are outside of the health sector, decentralization, public financial management, and all of those factors that affect the purchasing landscape. So if we look at the next slide, in preparing for support to JKN strategic purchasing, I've been looking across systems that I think are relevant for Indonesia and JKN and how they do this and what the results have been. So I've been looking at Estonia, Malaysia, the Philippines, South Korea, and Thailand, and how they organize strategic purchasing functions, how they carry it out, and what the results have been for equity, quality, sustainability of their systems. So you can see here that most of the purchasing functions are carried out by independent purchasing agencies in these systems, with the exception of Malaysia, but with some role, of course, for the Ministry of Health for setting standards and other regulatory functions. On the next slide, just to show how much that these systems have invested in their operational systems to constantly improve information systems, their contracting, their claims processing, provider payment, and provider monitoring. So a lot of investment has been done in these systems to build the strategic purchasing function. Let's look at the results. On the next slide, please. But I think that the systems that really have had the greatest results from their strategic purchasing investments are Estonia and Thailand, where most of their health financing from the public side is funneled through their purchasing agencies. And in these systems, we have seen good cost management, some increase in priority on primary health care that shows up in a reduction in avoidable hospitalization, improved quality, and very, very strong improvement on financial protection. That the out-of-pocket payments in Estonia and Thailand are around 20% or less of total health expenditure. How does this show up in equity? On the next slide, please. I think Thailand is quite a stellar example of how very systematic, clear directed policies, both on the revenue side, the subsidy side, and the strategic purchasing side, has shown up in very pro-core coverage of essential services. And on this slide, you can see that the coverage of maternal and child health services is at least equitable, and in some cases, in fact, pro-core. And this has been brought about by a concerted effort on both the revenue and the expenditure side, targeting available resources and strategically purchasing services that are of high priority. So what does all of this mean for JKN? I want to share on the next slide that with a number of colleagues commissioned by DJSN in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, DJS, University of Gajah Mada, that our team did a review of the current state of strategic purchasing under JKN and what progress is being made on the institutional structure, operational systems, and capacity, and where might some improvements be possible. So on the next slide, we reviewed more than 100 regulations that pertain to JKN and specifically strategic purchasing. And the study found that there is currently a lack of clarity in the legislation and the regulations about institutional responsibilities, different purchasing functions, and the outcome is that the power of the public purchaser has not been fully leveraged at this time in JKN, and that there's certainly scope to do more. Next slide has some of the recommendations that came out of the study, that being more clear in the mandate of BPJS to make it both a health and a financing institution to really be responsible and accountable for purchasing services effectively, efficiently, and ensuring equity. I think more routine monitoring is needed to answer some of those questions that I posed earlier in the session about where resources are going. Are they going to the poor? Are they going to more cost-effective services? Can we routinely monitor this better? And is there a way to bring more accountability for this implementation to the local governments and have more of a partnership to ensure that strategic purchasing is happening at all levels of the system and that the resources are going to priority populations and services? I just want to conclude with some final thoughts about whether JKN is improving equity, how strategic purchasing can be better leveraged in the system to ensure that progress continues to be made, improving effective coverage, equity, but also efficiency and sustainability. I think that my conclusion is there are many signs that it's going in the right direction, that coverage, access, utilization, financial protection are improving, and signs are pointing towards improved equity. But there are still remaining challenges, and the supply side continues to be a source of inequity and variability. And we're missing some key information that's needed to really monitor whether coverage of priority services is improving, particularly for the poor, and whether quality is improving for poor vulnerable groups. And just a reminder that this doesn't happen automatically, that in system after system, as resources continue to grow, coverage expands, without strategic purchasing intervention, those resources will naturally accrue. They will be directed more likely towards tertiary services in urban areas, and on their own will likely migrate towards the wealthier populations. So interventions, very concerted policies are needed to make sure that the resources are directed towards the poor and vulnerable, towards cost-effective parts of the system, in particular primary health care. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to continue to leverage the strategic purchasing approaches under JKN to continue to make the improvements that we're already seeing. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share these thoughts with you.
Thank you very much, very enlightening. Baik, terima kasih kepada Ibu. Jadi tadi adalah rekaman dari webinar session yang kami lakukan dengan keynote speaker kita, Sheryl Kasha, dan menarik sekali bahwa beliau menyatakan walaupun ada beberapa indikasi yang menunjukkan kecenderungan yang baik, bahwa dari sisi kepesertaan, dari sisi akses dan digitalisasi, serta dari sisi turunnya UUP terhadap biaya pengeluaran kesehatan, ini menunjukkan indikasi yang baik ke arah equity dalam JKN. Tapi masih banyak hal yang menjadi pertanyaan beliau, karena masih ada banyak informasi yang dibutuhkan lebih jauh, khususnya kalau terkait dengan supply side kita yang memang masih sangat bervariasi. Bukan hanya dari sisi ketersediaan layanan, tetapi juga dari sisi mutunya. Jadi ketidakmerataannya bukan hanya dalam hal akses, tapi juga mutu layanan yang ada di berbagai daerah di Indonesia. Dan saran beliau adalah melakukan strategic purchasing sebagai sebuah policy action untuk menangani ketidakadilan yang masih dirasakan, agar resources yang ada bisa lebih diarahkan untuk pelayanan yang lebih proper dan juga untuk kualitas yang lebih merata bagi semua masyarakat di Indonesia. Dan beliau juga menggarisbawahi pentingnya peran monitoring terhadap sistem yang sekarang berjalan untuk memastikan bahwa JKN semakin lama akan semakin bergerak menuju keadilan untuk seluruh masyarakat Indonesia. So, Novel, I think you might have one or two words to say, because you mentioned something about the strategic purchasing in Taiwan. Do you think the strategic purchasing might be a good way to address the inequity, particularly in Indonesia, if you reflect from Taiwan experience?
That's a very tough question because I don't think strategic purchasing is the only factor. There are several other factors as well. But let me sort of elaborate a little bit more on what I think Cheryl is referring to, and I think that refers to the fact that we have a clear purchaser-provider split. And again, there's a historical development there. When we talk about the purchaser-provider split, what that means is in 2002, when the National Health Security Act passed, we basically set up in that act a National Health Security Office. And the National Health Security Office is basically going to be the purchasing agency. The Ministry of Public Health, on the other hand, acts as a provider only. So the money that usually gets channeled through the Ministry of Public Health now gets transferred to the National Health Security Office, who then controls the cash flows as well as sets up the purchasing provider payment mechanism. The fact that there's a divide is actually part of attributable to how we gain efficiency. Because the costs get stripped down. Before, when everything was basically with the Ministry of Public Health, the Ministry of Public Health used to provide block grants in order to make sure that hospitals wouldn't have any deficits. But currently, that's not possible anymore because the money is not with the Ministry of Public Health. Hospitals are required to be more efficient in terms of the system, and that comes with a lot of problems as well because. Sometimes it's very difficult to do cost control at the hospital level because you can't estimate the demand, especially when you have a comprehensive package.
Thank you. Baik Bapak dan Ibu, karena waktu yang sudah selesai, sudah habis, sudah cukup ingatkan. Jadi kita terpaksa menutup sesi siang hari ini dengan mewakili speaker tadi, Novel dan Cheryl. Dua-duanya menggarisbawahi bahwa yang pertama, cakupan kesehatan semesta itu tidak terjadi dengan sendirinya. Butuh proses yang cukup panjang. Tadi disampaikan di Thailand keberhasilan mereka didukung oleh dua hal. Yaitu yang pertama memang ada political minister yang berhasil. Yang kedua adalah persiapan, dan persiapannya adalah cukup panjang. Beliau tadi ceritakan secara historical, mulai bahkan dari 65 tahun sebelumnya sudah dipersiapkan semuanya. Yang dipersiapkan apa? Supply side-nya. Jadi ada produksi tenaga kerjanya, kemudian ditambah juga tenaga kerja yang sudah ada, dokter khususnya, diberi kebijakan untuk ditempatkan di daerah-daerah terpencil selama jangka waktu tertentu. Tapi bukan hanya aturan untuk memastikan bahwa mereka berada di sana, tapi mereka juga disertai dengan insentif yang cukup baik sehingga pendapatan mereka lebih baik dibandingkan kalau mereka berada di daerah perkotaan. Kemudian juga bahwa mereka memperkuat bukan hanya keberadaan primary care dan hospital, tapi juga secara geografis harus tersedia untuk setiap 5.000 penduduk. Dan dipastikan karena produksi tenaga kerja yang sudah ada, aturannya sudah ada, dipastikan bahwa primary care dan rumah sakit yang tersedia ini bisa melayani masyarakat dengan baik. Dan juga mereka juga memastikan bahwa produksi obat-obatan bisa dilakukan secara murah di dalam negeri sendiri, sehingga cost-nya bisa lebih turun. Dan kemudian ada tadi disebutkan juga political manuver yang cukup baik. Jadi ada asosiasi dokter pedesaan yang sangat kuat melobi ke pemerintah pada saat itu. Walaupun tidak mendapat dukungan, dia lalu mengalihkan lobinya ke partai yang oposisi yang justru akan diperkirakan akan memenangkan pemilu. Dan ternyata memang betul menang sehingga kebijakan ini bisa digolkan. Dan kita melihat bahwa ada perubahan atau ada proses yang berjalan yang cukup lama, termasuk beberapa perubahan mekanisme dalam melakukan cakupan kesehatan semesta. Ini sesuatu hal yang menarik yang bisa kita pelajari di Indonesia karena banyak hal yang mirip antara Thailand dengan Indonesia. Sementara dari Cheryl tadi mengatakan bahwa keadilan atau equity itu tidak juga terjadi dengan sendirinya. Harus ada policy action untuk memastikan hal tersebut. Sehingga kita bisa melihat bahwa kebijakan JKN yang sekarang masih dalam proses, tentu saja masih bisa kita monitoring terus sampai berjalannya nanti ke depan, dan masih bisa kita perbaiki untuk mempertahankan dan meningkatkan cakupan kesehatan semesta serta menjamin ekuitas baik dalam hal layanan maupun kualitas pada masyarakat. Baik, terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu atas sesi yang menarik ini. Terima kasih kepada para co-host. Thank you, Novel.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Baik, terima kasih. Dengan demikian maka sesi pada sore hari ini berakhir. Terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Sita untuk dari representative. We have a souvenir for you. Baik, terima kasih. Thank you, Mr. Novel Witporako, PhD. Dan untuk Bapak dan Ibu, karena satu dan lain hal, kita break lagi selama kurang lebih 15 menit sampai pukul 15 waktu Indonesia Barat untuk menghadiri nanti sesi pleno terakhir di pukul 15 waktu Indonesia Barat. Untuk Bapak Ibu yang mungkin sudah lapor lagi, sudah kami sediakan juga coffee break di tempat yang sama. Kalau tidak, bisa tetap berada di ruangan ini. Terima kasih.
Kembali pemirsa bersama kami, bersama saya lagi di Kebijakan. Ya. Betul. Dari Thailand juga langsung dan dengan yang bisa kita record. Dan tadi kita sudah membahas dua tema yang sangat menarik juga tentang lady. Jadi yang pertama pembelajaran dari studi kasus Thailand dalam mencapai universal health coverage-nya. Dan juga tadi ada pertanyaan yang menggelitik juga, apakah implementasi kebijakan JKN akan meningkatkan keadilan dan pencapaian universal health coverage. Gitu. Iya, betul. Waduh, betul. Kita sudah menyediakan kursi panas pemirsa karena sesaat lagi, iya, yang akan kita wawancara sehubungan dengan bagaimana kebijakan kesehatan saat ini dalam mencapai universal health coverage. 10 fokus kita. Iya, semoga masih semangat ya. Untuk narasumber kita ya. Oh, tekan lagi suaranya
Suara saya belum dengar ya.
Iya.
Cek sudah masuk? Sudah masuk?
Baik.
Oke, kita sapa dulu rekan-rekan kita di 10 kota. Ada
Di 10 kota, Jakarta,
di Makassar, ada di Jember, Manado,
di Sumatera, Samarinda, Bandung,
dan juga di Bandung.
Padang, dan Medan.
Dan semoga masih semangat untuk bersama kami di sini, dan sesaat lagi kita akan bersama untuk ngobrol lagi ya.
Ngobrol lagi dengan kita undang langsung saja. Kepada Profesor Dr. Laksono Trisnaparo MSc PhD. Selamat sore Prof. Selamat sore
semuanya.
Semua di 10 kota kita kembali bersama dengan Prof. Laksono Trisnaparo sebagai Ketua Forum Kebijakan Kesehatan Indonesia ini, Prof ya. Ya, Prof, untuk 2 hari ini, apakah capaian dari Forum Nasional Kebijakan Kesehatan Indonesia ke-7 ini sudah bisa menghasilkan beberapa policy brief yang nanti akan diangkat kepada pemangku kebijakan?
Ya, kalau untuk presiden sendiri ya kita belum mengurusi. Tapi di forum ini kita telah ada suatu pertemuan yang menarik ya antara policymaker, akademisi, ya, dengan para peneliti, forum-forum ini seperti ada di sesi formal, gitu. Kemudian juga di informal, di sela-sela makan siang atau nah, ini kita saya Bu Menteri tiba-tiba nggak bisa datang karena Pak Jokowi masih dalam pemerintahan. Padahal Bu Menteri sudah siap dengan tiket semuanya, dengan pesawat, semuanya